From dynamics surrounding the Tumbler Ridge tragedy to travelers caught up in Cuban chaos, the push for a big Edmonton beer garden, and the impact of politics on Alberta's dating scene. Our Primetime This Week panel is in. And joining us this evening, Alex Boyd, Alberta-based national reporter for the Toronto Star, and Bob Sumner, former 30-year news veteran, now a media and communications consultant. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with the outpouring of grief and support in the wake of this week's tragedy in northeastern BC, a mass shooting that left 9 people dead.
It's an absolutely awful situation in Tumbler Ridge. Our hearts are broken.
Calgary's mayor echoing the sentiments of many Albertans in the wake of the inconceivable loss of life in the small BC town not far from the Alberta border.
Our hearts are with the educators, the first responders, the families who have been impacted. It's going to be a long road to navigate this senseless tragedy and loss.
From Alberta's Premier, a message reassuring our neighbours to the west they're not alone, adding, know that Alberta and the whole of Canada is thinking of you. Heartbreak shared by the Alberta Teachers Association. As educators, our schools are not just buildings, they are the heart of our communities and our sacred spaces where children should always feel safe. Psychologists say families should keep an eye out for changing habits in their children, like becoming clingy or exhibiting illness.
Approaching your kid and saying, hey honey, I'm noticing that you're having a lot of tummy troubles lately. I'm wondering if you're feeling scared or worried about what has happened recently.
As well, showing your child you're there for them and they're not alone in their feelings. Alex, I know you've been reporting on the story this week. What has the tragedy opened your eyes to as a reporter, and how you're engaging coverage of the story?
It has been, awful story for the communities, for the families, for everyone watching. From a media perspective, I think what is really reinforced for me is how challenging it can be these days to get good information out to the people that need it. When something like this happens, we all want to know, what happened, who was affected, but these sorts of answers take time. And I think this time there was about 24 hours between when the shooting occurred and when the RCMP had their first substantive press conference and began to start to answer some of these questions. But in that period, we saw speculation on social media. We saw photos of people that weren't the shooter get major traction. We saw, all sorts of false claims made about the identity of the shooter. And again, I very much get the curiosity, but as a reporter, it really feels like we're competing against, social media users, unverified posts. And so this struggle to get good information out to people who want it, to people who deserve it, has never felt more challenging.
Bob, from flags flying at half-mast on federal, provincial, municipal buildings, we saw a bit of that there in the footage, to the apparent parking of partisan politics. What do you take away from how response to this horrible situation has played out?
Yeah, well, I think the response is very, very genuine. You can see it all over Calgary and across the country, with flags down and just the way people speak. And, it's impacted a lot of people, but I think that it's a very genuine outpouring, and hopefully that the little tiny community up there feels the support and love of all Canadians.
Alex, do you have a sense for where this story evolves to?
Oh gosh, it is still such early days in terms of questions about some of the weapons used, why they were in the home. They were seized at some point, but then ended up back there. There's all sorts of questions about, the mental health of the shooter and why those sorts of things weren't addressed. Were their services offered? Was that enough done? So there's all sorts of questions that are going to continue to be answered. It's one of those situations where information is probably going to come out in drips and drabs, in the months to come. So we're very much, just at the very beginning stages of figuring out really what happened here, and hopefully, support for the community, compassion for what happened, continues to keep pace as well.
Bob, you've worked story assignment desk. What do you see needing to be covered moving forward?
Yeah, just I want to touch on the mental health because I'm a huge proponent of that, and Alex did mention it, of course. I just think it needs to be expanded because these kids now are up against it so much. They're staring at their phones all the time. There's a lot of isolation, bullying, everything. So the mental health issue really needs to stand up and step up. And just start taking care of our collective mental health across the country.
All right. Next up, a mad scramble out of Cuba this week.
The situation is really terrible. You can see chaos.
Albertans among the many Canadian travelers racing to catch flights home as airlines suspend service to Cuba. It's thanks to a fuel crisis gripping the island, disruptions stemming from U.S. sanctions under the Trump administration on countries selling oil to Cuba.
What's going on in the world today? At this point, I'm not going there anytime soon.
I'd feel like the United States is out of control.
Yeah, you never want to get stuck anyway.
Now, no desire to go to Cuba.
And it represents a significant blow to a nation that relies heavily on Canadian visitors.
For the month of February, there were over 600 flights from Canada going to Cuba, representing about 120,000 seats.
It'll be pretty painful for the Cuban people. With brownouts because of power and fuel shortages for cars and resorts shutting down.
It will also mean rescheduling trips ahead of the busy spring break season, which could be costly.
Cuba is one of the least expensive all-inclusive destinations, so people are looking at having to pay additional monies to travel.
Global Affairs estimates at least 7,200 Canadians needed to be repatriated home this week. Alex, before we get to the tourism aspect, what's to be said for the people of Cuba, the situation they find themselves in?
Yeah, I mean, I think we often look at these stories as tourism stories, as travel stories, which makes sense. They're very popular destinations. But these sorts of restrictions are having very real impacts for people who live in Cuba. And obviously they're no stranger to facing restrictions or certain rules, particularly from the U.S. But when you target energy like this, it has a way of targeting, absolutely everyone, even the most vulnerable folks in Cuba who have to, worry about getting up and not having their lights turning on. So it really feels like the latest lesson in just how quickly, a change of tone or a change in strategy in Washington can have very real impacts for your economy, which is obviously something Canadians have been thinking about, but something that Cubans are now very much feeling.
Bob, what is to be made of how the week played out for so many travelers, uncertain of what was happening, and then the scramble to catch flights home?
Yeah, and I'm sure that they were wondering why they picked that destination for their dream winter getaway. But I mean, there is a little bit of a risk anytime you go anywhere like the Caribbean or anywhere. I think the airlines stood up and got everyone home really safely, and they're going to be looking at a big loss of income as well. So I feel bad for the Cuban people the most, and I'm glad all the vacationers got home. But at the end of the day, that's a vacation gone bad. So they'll recover from it and book somewhere else.
Well, and Alex, from a traveler's perspective, how big of a shakeup do you see this bringing to the tourism industry?
I mean, I think a lot is going to hinge on whether this is kind of a few-week blip or whether it extends beyond that, because, tourism runs on certainty. You book a vacation, you plan to, take time off work because you don't want to have to worry about stuff like this. And so if it becomes this prevailing idea that, Cuba has issues, or if you go there, there might be problems, that's the sort of, lingering sense of uncertainty that can have real impact on the tourism industry. So, again, I think kind of the next couple of weeks are going to be really telling in terms of whether this is a flash in the pan or something that becomes, a little bit more baked in.
Indeed. Okay, time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, red tape around entertainment districts and the role politics can play in the Alberta dating game. More from our Primetime This Week panel in a moment. Welcome back. There is a push on to create a new entertainment district in Edmonton, and it's one that already has an identity. Happy Beer Street can be found along a section of 99th Street, just south of White Ave, home to 10 craft breweries and the occasional road closing event drawing thousands. Playing host to more, though, it has not been so easy.
The bureaucracy that goes into hosting that is extremely difficult and very limiting on how many times we can do that per year.
Their solution for the city to create a one-block zone that can be closed to traffic and act like a big beer garden, and it's getting support.
I think it has to create an area where people feel they can go, they can have some entertainment, they can have some interaction, but it doesn't impact others around here negatively.
I think we should do it. I mean, ideas like this, we need more of this in the city, not less.
The city says 2 existing entertainment districts on Rice Howard Way and 104th Street downtown have been successful without a rise in public drunkenness or other disorder. Alex, the issue for businesses here is that every application for a special event license requires what they call a barrage of emails to the city, AGLC. Where do you weigh in on the application of so-called red tape reduction here?
You know, what struck me about this story is when they did a public survey about whether folks in the area wanted it, the number of people in support of this proposal was like 87%. And I'm struggling to recall another example outside of like North Korea that was, you know, so widely supported by people. So it certainly feels like this is something that people want. But again, you know, if you're going to have to go up against this wall of paperwork to do anything, people are just not going to do it. So this does feel like an example where, you know, people want it. There are, you know, probably some concerns, but there are 2 other spots in the city where it's been done successfully. So it feels like a pretty strong argument for maybe dismissing with some of that red tape.
Bob, to what degree do you see this helping the craft beer industry, which if you read some of the headlines, it's on something of a downward trend. Even Olds College suspending its unique craft beverage and brewery operations program.
Yeah, you know, anything that can be positive that would draw people into an area that would support these businesses would be awesome. And, you know, we always hear governments say, oh, we want to drop red tape and make things easier. But it seems to me it's still the same. But I know you can see the ABF hat above my head there. I work with Alberta Beer Festivals. So the more we can do to just bring these businesses up and send people down there for an entertaining and fun time. These people are all responsible business people. So they don't want anything bad to happen in that area, and I think it'll be great for Edmonton, and then Calgary's going to want one as well. You know, like you guys got the new arena, now we need one. So
it only makes sense, Bob. Only makes sense.
Right.
Okay. All right. One more topic. Cuba may be making some cutbacks this Valentine's Day.
It's really hard, it's expensive, it takes a lot of time. I think a lot of people are just feeling the burnout of dating.
And it's being reflected in a recent survey that shows 36% of Albertans are going on fewer dates. That's higher than the rest of the country. And this matchmaker suggests the political divide in Alberta may be playing a role.
Have a lot of like kind of friction. So we're just going on less dates because we're deciding right out the gate, okay, I don't want to date this person because they don't have the same political standing as me, they don't have the same religious values or all of these things.
The survey also found Albertans are prioritizing financial transparency and finding a match good with money.
People need to be able to match those goals and values that are important to you. And sometimes it's not a connect. And that's why people, I think, are more discerning when it comes to dating.
Now, as for reasons Albertans would end relationships, the survey says bad spending habits, risky investment decisions, and never offering to pay. Bob, how surprised are you by the picture the survey paints of Albertans' approach to dating? Isn't this the province with a reputation of being big spenders?
Yeah, it's weird being asked about dating because I'm quite old and have been married for a long time. But I know I talked to some young people this morning at the gym, and they said it's terrible out there. It's really hard to find somebody that you can get along with. And with the political divide, everything that is out on social media now, I understand why people aren't dating because it's almost better just to go on it alone for a while.
Alex, what do you make of the suggestion that political divide could be having an impact on Alberta's dating scene?
You know, that makes sense to me. You know, I've long thought that one of the interesting things about living in Alberta is it's much harder, I think, here to live in a political bubble than it is in other parts of the country. You know, our political allegiances in Canada often sort kind of along geographical lines. Like, for example, most major cities tend to be slightly more progressive, rural areas tend to be more right-leaning. But, you know, if you look at Calgary, our biggest city, you know, provincially, it went, you know, pretty close to half-half, you know, UCP, NDP, in the last election. So I think if you are not willing to date or have friction with someone who doesn't, think politically like you do, you are just more likely to run into them here, I think, than you might be in other places. And, this idea that we're more polarized these days, I think, is more true. And then we're also, not to use the political science word, but we're more effectively polarized, which basically means not only are you more likely to, adhere to a particular team, but you're more likely to think that the other team is bad. So all of this adds up to, I think, making dating a little bit more challenging than it already is.
All right, folks. We'll leave it on that note. Good to see you both. Thank you kindly. Hope you have an awesome weekend.
Happy
Michael,
family day. Yeah.